During Thanksgiving dinner, my son pushed me out of my chair and said, "That chair isn't for you, Mom. It's for my father-in-law." In front of the entire family, I was pushed away from the head of the table. No one spoke. No one defended me. The room went silent, and in that silence, I understood something chilling. This wasn't about a chair. It was about power. So I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I looked my son in the eye and said 4 words, and that was the night everything they'd built began to collapse. Welcome to Family Revenge Stories. Thank you for being here and watching this story. Before the story goes any further, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what the temperature is where you are right now. Your voice helps this channel grow and brings this community together. Also, please note, this story contains fictional elements crafted for storytelling and educational reflection. Any resemblance to real names or places is purely coincidental, but the message behind the story is meant to make you think. The wrench slipped from my hand and clattered onto the concrete floor of the barn. I muttered under my breath. Nothing colorful, just the kind of frustration that comes from fighting a stubborn bolt on a 40-year-old tractor when the light's already fading. November in Iowa doesn't give you much daylight to work with, and I'd been at this since lunch. I'm Calvin Barlow, 68 years old, though most days my back reminds me I might as well be 80. This farm, 380 acres of black Iowa soil, has been in my family for 4 generations. My great-grandfather broke this ground with a team of horses. My grandfather survived the Dust Bowl. My father handed me the keys to the John Deere when I was 16 and told me, "Don't let it die on your watch." I haven't. The barn smelled like engine oil and old hay, familiar and grounding. I bent down to pick up the wrench, my knees protesting, and that's when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I almost didn't answer. Telemarketers love to call right around dinner time. But the name on the screen stopped me cold. Trevor, my son, 43 years old, lives 20 miles east in one of those new subdivisions where every house looks the same and nobody knows their neighbors' names. We used to talk every week, then every month. Well, it's been about 3 years since we had a real conversation. The kind where you actually say what you mean. I wiped my hands on my jeans and answered, "Dad?" His voice sounded tight, rehearsed even. "Trevor, everything all right?" Yeah, everything's fine." A pause. "Listen, Natalie and I were talking and we'd like you to come for Thanksgiving. Dinner at our place, around 6. I straightened up, caught off guard. Thanksgiving. The last few years I'd spent it alone with a Swanson turkey dinner and the Packers game on TV. Mary used to make the whole spread turkey, stuffing her famous pecan pie. The house felt too big without her. Still does. She passed away 6 years ago, and some days it feels like yesterday. "You sure about that?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Of course I'm sure." He sounded almost offended. "You're my father, and Miles keeps asking about you." Miles, my grandson. 19 now, probably halfway through his first semester at college. Smart kid. Good kid. I hadn't seen him since last Christmas, and even then, it was just a quick handshake in a grocery store parking lot. Miles asked about me. "Yeah, he misses his grandpa." Trevor's voice softened just a little. "So, what do you say 6 o'clock Thanksgiving Day?" I should have said no. Something in my gut was already twisting the same instinct that tells you a storm's coming before the sky goes dark. But the thought of seeing Miles again, of maybe, just maybe, closing the gap that had opened up between me and my son, that was enough. "Who else is coming?" I asked. "Just family. Natalie's parents will be there. Preston and Lorraine." Preston Pemberton. I'd met him twice. Sharp dresser, firm handshake, the kind of man who smiles with his mouth but not his eyes. He'd made a fortune in finance or so, Trevor said, and retired early to one of those gated communities where they measure your worth by your golf handicap. I couldn't stand him, but I kept that to myself. Sounds like a full house, I said. It will be, so. You'll come. I glanced around the barn. The tractor could wait. The fields weren't going anywhere. And maybe, just maybe, this was the olive branch I'd been waiting for. I'll be there, I said. Great, 6 o'clock, don't be late. He hung up before I could say anything else. I stood there in the dimming light, phone still in my hand, staring at the screen. Something about that call didn't sit right. Trevor's voice had been off. Not warm, not casual, like he was reading from a script. Like someone was standing over his shoulder telling him what to say. I shook my head. I was overthinking it. Trevor was my son. He wanted me at Thanksgiving. That was a good thing, wasn't it? I slipped the phone back into my pocket and returned to the tractor. The bolt finally gave way on the third try, and I spent the next hour finishing the repair as the sun disappeared behind the western tree line. By the time I walked back to the house, my hands were stiff from the cold, and my mind was elsewhere. Mary's voice echoed in my head the way it sometimes did when I needed her most. Trust your gut, Cal. It's never steered you wrong. I locked the barn door and looked out across the fields. The land stretched out in every direction, dark and silent under the November sky. 4 generations of Barlows had worked this soil. 4 generations of sweat and sacrifice. It was mine to protect, mine to pass down. I just didn't know yet that someone was already planning to take it. I said yes to that Thanksgiving invitation. 2 weeks later, I'd realized that dinner would cost me everything I'd built and everyone I thought I knew. The front door swung open before I could knock. Trevor stood in the doorway, backlit by warm light from inside, wearing a sweater I didn't recognize and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Behind him, I could hear voices, laughter, the clinking of glasses. The smell of roasted turkey drifted out into the cold November air. Dad, you made it. He stepped aside. Come in. I handed him the bottle of wine I'd picked up, nothing fancy, just something to bring. Trevor took it without looking at the label and hung my coat in the closet. The house was bigger than I remembered. Open floor plan, vaulted ceilings, granite countertops. The kind of place you see in magazines. Trevor worked in medical equipment sales, but this house seemed like it cost more than his salary could cover. Everyone's in the dining room, he said. I followed him through the living room and into the dining room where a long table had been set for 8. Crystal glasses, cloth napkins, candles and autumn leaves arranged in the center. And there at the far end of the table stood Preston Pemberton, tall, silver-haired navy blazer over a crisp white shirt. His smile was wide and confident, the kind that says I own every room I walk into. He crossed the room and extended his hand. Calvin, good to see you. His grip was firm. Too firm. Trevor's told us so much about the farm. 4th generation, isn't it? That's right. Remarkable. That kind of legacy is rare these days. He clapped me on the shoulder like we were old friends. Most people don't have the discipline to build something that lasts. Preston had a way of talking that made everything sound like a compliment and a judgment at the same time. Preston let the man breathe. Lorraine Pemberton appeared at her husband's side, elegant in a cream-colored blouse and pearls. She offered me a polite smile and a brief handshake. Her fingers were cold. Calvin, thank you for joining us. Grandpa, I turned, and there was Miles, grinning ear to ear. He wrapped me in a hug that nearly knocked the wind out of me. 19 years old, broad-shouldered, taller than me now. Hey, kiddo, I squeezed his shoulder. You've grown. Yeah, well, college food'll do that, he laughed. How's the farm? Still standing. Natalie appeared in the doorway carrying a bowl of mashed potatoes. She glanced at me, offered a tight smile, and set the bowl on the table without a word. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted the placement. She didn't meet my eyes. All right, everyone, let's sit, Trevor said. Dinner's ready. We found our seats. Preston settled at one end of the table, Lorraine to his right. Trevor sat across from her, Natalie beside him. Miles slid into the chair next to me, and at the other end, the head of the table where I'd always sat when Mary hosted Thanksgiving, there was an empty chair. Dishes were passed. Glasses were filled. Preston launched into a story about a trip to Napa Valley, something about vineyard tours and wine auctions. Lorraine smiled on cue. Natalie laughed at the right moments. Trevor nodded along, his jaw tight. I ate in silence, the weight of the empty chair pressing on me. Preston's voice filled the room, confident, measured, just loud enough to make sure everyone was listening. He talked about investments, about opportunities, about a project that was going to change everything. He didn't ask about anyone else's life. He didn't need to. Trevor sat between us, shoulders hunched, pushing food around his plate like a man caught between two worlds. I glanced at Miles. He was watching his father, concern flickering across his face. And then I noticed Preston's hand resting on the back of the empty chair, the one at the head of the table. My chair. He caught me looking and smiled. After what felt like an eternity, Preston set down his fork and cleared his throat. The table fell quiet. Before we go any further, he said, I'd like to say a few words. Everyone turned toward him. Lorraine folded her hands in her lap. Natalie's expression was unreadable. Trevor stared at his plate. Thanksgiving is about gratitude, Preston began. About appreciating what we have and recognizing the people who make our lives possible. Family, legacy, the foundations we build for the next generation. He paused, letting the words settle. I'm grateful for this beautiful home that Trevor and Natalie have built. For Miles, who's making us all proud. And for Lorraine, my rock for 37 years. Lorraine smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Preston turned his gaze toward me. And Calvin, we're grateful you could join us tonight. The farm, the land that's been in your family for generations, that kind of legacy deserves respect. The way he said legacy made my skin crawl, like he was already appraising it. But legacy isn't just about what we inherit, Preston continued. It's about what we do with it, how we steward it, how we pass it on to those who can truly make it thrive. I felt the room tilt. Trevor wouldn't look at me. Natalie was gripping her napkin like a lifeline. Miles's jaw was set, his eyes locked on his grandfather. So tonight, Preston said, raising his glass, let's be grateful for family, for tradition, and for the wisdom to know when to hold on and when to let go. He smiled again, that polished, calculated smile, and took a sip of his wine. No one else drank. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. Preston gestured toward the head of the table. Now why don't we take our seats and begin? I hesitated, but tradition pulled me forward. I moved toward the empty chair, weaving around the table, my boots heavy on the hardwood floor. The chair was waiting, high-backed, solid oak. The same kind my grandfather used to sit in. I reached for it, my hand closing around the wood. A hand gripped my shoulder. I froze. The pressure was firm, insistent, pulling me back before I could even think about sitting down. Dad. Trevor's voice, low, strained. That seat's not for you. I turned. My son stood inches away, his face pale, his jaw set. Behind him, Preston watched from across the table, arms crossed, expression unreadable. What? I said that seat's not for you. Trevor's voice was louder now, filling the room. He stepped between me and the chair, his hand still on my shoulder. This seat is for my father-in-law. The words hung in the air like smoke. For a moment I thought I'd misheard, that this was some kind of joke. But Trevor wasn't smiling. His eyes were hard, almost desperate, like a man who'd rehearsed this moment 100 times and still couldn't believe he was going through with it. Trevor, so this is Preston's seat. He cut me off. He's family. He's earned it. I glanced around the table. Natalie was staring at her plate, her knuckles white around her napkin. Lorraine's expression was frozen, polite, but distant. Miles sat rigid in his chair, his eyes locked on me, pain written all over his face. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. No one spoke. "Son," I said quietly, keeping my voice steady. "This is tradition. Your great-grandfather sat in this chair. Your grandfather. Me. And one day you." Not tonight." Trevor's hand tightened on my shoulder. "Tonight it's Preston's." "Trevor." Preston's voice was calm, almost gentle. "It's fine. Calvin can sit wherever he'd like." But it wasn't fine. We all knew it. This wasn't about a chair. This was about something bigger. Something I didn't understand yet. I looked at my son, really looked at him. The way his shoulders were hunched. The way his hand trembled just slightly on my shoulder. The way his eyes darted toward Preston, and then away like he was afraid of disappointing him. And in that moment, I saw it. Trevor wasn't standing up to me. He was standing for someone else. "Step aside, son." My voice was firm now. "I'm sitting in my chair." Trevor didn't move. Instead, he shifted his weight, planting himself between me and the seat. His hand left my shoulder and pressed against my chest, not hard, but deliberate. Blocking me. "I'm sorry, Dad," his voice cracked. "But this is how it is now." And then he pushed. It wasn't violent. It wasn't a shove meant to hurt. But it was firm enough to make me take a step back, my boots scraping against the hardwood. Firm enough to make it clear that he wasn't going to let me sit. The room went completely silent. Miles shot to his feet. "Dad, what are you—" "Sit down, Miles." Trevor's voice was sharp. He didn't look at his son. He didn't look at me. He stared at the floor, his chest rising and falling like he'd just run a mile. I stood there, one hand braced against the table, trying to process what had just happened. My son, my own son, had just pushed me away. In front of his family. In front of Preston. In front of everyone. Preston cleared his throat. "Well, this is unfortunate." He gestured toward an empty seat near the other end of the table. "Calvin, why don't you sit over here? We'll still have a nice dinner." I didn't move. I couldn't. My legs felt like lead. Trevor finally looked at me. His eyes were red, his jaw trembling. But he didn't apologize. He didn't take it back. "Trevor." Natalie's voice was barely a whisper. "Maybe. No." Trevor cut her off. He straightened, squaring his shoulders, and took a step toward Preston's side of the table. "This is the right thing." The right thing. I looked at Miles. He was still standing, fists clenched at his sides, staring at his father like he didn't recognize him. I looked at Preston. He met my gaze, his expression perfectly neutral. But there was something in his eyes. Satisfaction. Control. This was his doing. I didn't know how or why, but I knew it in my bones. I took a breath. Let it out slowly. And when I spoke, my voice was calm. Steady. The kind of calm that comes from years of weathering storms. "You'll regret this, son." 4 words. That's all I said. Trevor flinched like I'd struck him. But he didn't respond. He just stood there, frozen, his hands shaking at his sides. I turned and walked toward the door. No one stopped me. No one said a word. Behind me, I heard Preston's voice, smooth and reassuring. "Let's all sit down and finish our meal. No sense letting this ruin the evening." I grabbed my coat from the closet and stepped out into the cold. The door clicked shut behind me, cutting off the muffled voices inside. The November air bit at my skin, sharp and unforgiving. I walked to my truck keys, heavy in my hand. The street was quiet. The neighbors' houses glowed with warm, light, families gathered inside, probably laughing, probably happy. I climbed into the driver's seat and sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. "You'll regret this, son." I didn't know it then, but those 4 words would unravel a conspiracy worth more than Trevor or Preston could ever imagine. They'd uncover lies buried for years. They'd expose a man who'd spent decades building his fortune on the backs of people who trusted him. And they'd force my son to choose between the father who raised him and the man who was destroying him. I turned the key. The engine coughed to life. The drive home was the longest 30 minutes of my life. The headlights cut through the darkness, 2 pale beams stretching across empty fields. My hands gripped the steering wheel, the engine humming low beneath me. The heater rattled, pushing warm air into the cab, but I couldn't shake the cold that had settled into my bones. I passed the Hutchins feed store closed up for the night, its sign dark against the November sky. A mile later, the co-op's grain elevator rose up on my left. These roads, I'd driven them 1,000 times. I knew every curve, every pothole, every farmhouse tucked back behind windbreaks of oak and cottonwood. But tonight it all felt different. Mary's voice drifted into my thoughts, soft and steady, the way it always did when I needed her most. "Cal, what does your gut say?" My gut said something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. I thought about Trevor. Not the man who'd stood in that dining room tonight, but the boy he used to be. 7 years old, following me around the farm, asking 100 questions. 10 years old, learning to drive the pickup, grinning so wide I thought his face might split. 16, working sunup to sundown during harvest, never once complaining. He'd been a good kid, honest, hard-working, the kind of son who'd look you in the eye when he shook your hand. What had changed him? The answer came slowly. Natalie. 3 years ago. She'd been polite at first, a little distant maybe, but I'd chalk that up to nerves. Then came the engagement, the wedding, and somewhere along the way, Trevor started pulling back. Fewer phone calls, fewer visits, always an excuse. And then Preston entered the picture. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. A father-in-law taking an interest, offering advice. Maybe financial help. Trevor had mentioned a business opportunity once, though he'd been vague. But tonight, watching the way Trevor looked at Preston like a man seeking approval or maybe permission, I realized it wasn't advice Preston had been offering. It was control. My jaw tightened. I eased off the gas as I approached the turnoff to County Road 12, the truck's tires crunching over gravel. The dashboard clock read 8:17. This wasn't about a chair. It wasn't about tradition or respect. It was about everything I'd built, everything my father and grandfather had built. 4 generations of sweat and sacrifice, all of it, sitting on 380 acres of Iowa soil, and someone wanted it. The realization hit me hard. I pulled over onto the shoulder and put the truck in park. My hands were shaking. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to steady myself. Why? The farm was profitable, not wildly, but enough. Good years and bad years like everyone else. The land was paid off, had been since my father's time. No debts, no liens, nothing that would make someone come after it, unless there was something I didn't know. I thought about Preston's toast. Legacy isn't just about what we inherit. It's about what we do with it. The wisdom to know when to hold on and when to let go. He'd been talking about me, about the farm. I forced myself to breathe. Getting angry wouldn't help. Anger made you sloppy. Mary used to say that too. Don't let them see you angry, Cal. Let them see you thinking. I pulled back onto the road, the engine growling as I picked up speed. The turnoff to the farm appeared ahead. The old wooden sign, barely visible, Barlow Farm, St. 1898. I didn't want revenge. That wasn't who I was, but I needed the truth. If someone was trying to take what was mine, what was ours, I needed to know why. Helena Crawford. The name came to me like a lifeline. She'd been our family lawyer for as long as I could remember. Sharp as a tack, even at 72. She'd handled my father's estate. She'd drawn up Mary's will. She knew every inch of this farm's history, every deed and contract and piece of paper that tied the Barlow name to this land. If anyone could help me, it was her. The farmhouse came into view, its windows dark, the porch light casting a pale yellow glow. I pulled into the gravel driveway and killed the engine. For a moment, I just sat there. The house felt bigger than it should, emptier. Mary had been gone 6 years, but some nights it felt like yesterday. Some nights I still expected to see the kitchen light on, smell coffee brewing, hear her voice calling me in from the barn. Tonight was one of those nights. I climbed out of the truck and looked up at the sky. Clear and cold stars scattered across the black. Miles had looked at me with such pain in his eyes, like he wanted to speak up but couldn't. Like he was watching something break and didn't know how to stop it. That boy deserved better. Trevor deserved better. And I was going to make sure they got it. I walked up the porch steps, the old boards creaking under my weight. Inside, the house was dark and silent. I flipped on the kitchen light and set my keys on the counter. The clock on the wall read 8:28. Too late to call Helena tonight. But first thing tomorrow morning, I'd dial her number. I wasn't looking for a fight. I wasn't looking to destroy anyone. But I was looking for answers. And the truth, whatever it was, would be worth more than Preston could ever imagine. When I pulled into the driveway, the farmhouse felt emptier than ever. But I wasn't alone, not anymore. Downtown Des Moines was quiet the morning after Thanksgiving. Most of the shops were still closed, their windows dark, the streets nearly empty except for a few cars, and the occasional pedestrian bundled against the cold. I found parking on the street outside the Meridian Building, a 4-story brick structure that had probably been there since the 50s, the kind of place that didn't need to impress anyone. Helena Crawford's office was on the 3rd floor. I took the stairs, my knees protested, but I needed the time to gather my thoughts. By the time I reached her door, the frosted glass panel etched with Crawford and Associates, estate law, I'd rehearsed what I was going to say half a dozen times. None of it sounded right. The door swung open before I could knock. Calvin Barlow. Helena stood in the doorway, a slim woman with steel gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a cardigan over a blouse and slacks. She didn't look 72. Sharp eyes, steady hands, the kind of presence that made you sit up straighter without meaning to. I was wondering when you'd show up. You were expecting me. Let's just say I had a feeling. She stepped aside. Come in, coffee's fresh. Her office was exactly what I'd expected, bookcases lining the walls crammed with leather-bound volumes and case files. A mahogany desk sat near the window, papers stacked neatly in wire trays, framed degrees on the wall, a photo of her late husband on the credenza. She poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot on a side table and handed me one. Black. Strong. The way I liked it. Sit. She gestured to a chair across from her desk. I sat. Helena settled into her chair and studied me over the rim of her cup. You look like hell, Calvin. Rough night, I imagine. She set down her cup. So, tell me what happened. I told her. Not every detail, I didn't need to relive it word by word, but enough. The dinner. Preston's toast. The empty chair at the head of the table. Trevor blocking me. The push. Helena listened, without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and folded her hands in her lap. And you left. I left. Did Trevor try to stop you? She nodded slowly, like she was filing that away. What about Miles, Natalie? Miles looked like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. Natalie wouldn't even look at me. Helena was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. Then she leaned forward, elbows on the desk. Shiru, Calvin, I need you to answer some questions, and I need you to be honest with me. All right. How's the farm doing financially? I blinked, caught off guard. Fine. We're profitable. Not rich, but comfortable. Last year we cleared about $260,000 after expenses. This year's looking to be closer to $280,000. That's none. Land's been paid off since my father's time. So it means around $180,000, give or take. Helena's eyes narrowed. And Trevor knows this. He should. I've never hidden it from him. She nodded, jotting something down on a legal pad. What about your will? Is it current? Sadie, Mary and I had it drawn up about 10 years ago. Everything goes to Trevor. The land, the house, the equipment, all of it. Any conditions. Just that he keep the farm in the family. Pass it down to Miles or his kids if he has any. Helena set down her pen and looked at me. Calvin, I'm going to be blunt. Trevor's behavior last night, that's not normal. That's not a son having a disagreement with his father. That's a son under pressure. Significant pressure. From Preston. Most likely. She tapped her fingers on the desk. The question is why? What does Preston gain from isolating you, from turning Trevor against you? I didn't have an answer. Helena stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the street below. I've been practicing law for 40 years. I've seen families torn apart over money, over land, over things that didn't matter in the end. But this, she turned back to me. This feels different. A different how calculated. Preston didn't just show up at Thanksgiving and decide to humiliate you on a whim. He's been working on Trevor for a while, building influence, creating dependency. The words landed heavy. What do I do? I asked. Helena returned to her desk and pulled a business card from a drawer. She slid it across to me. Julian Sawyer, private investigator. He specializes in financial fraud, asset tracing, that sort of thing. He's worked with me on a few cases over the years. Discreet, thorough. If Preston's up to something, Julian will find it. I picked up the card. Plain white, black text. Julian Sawyer Investigations. Why, you think Preston's trying to steal the farm? Helena's face darkened. Calvin, I've seen this pattern before. And it never ends with just a chair. The weight of those words settled over me like a blanket. I'll also recommend we do a few things proactively, Helena continued. Update your will. Make sure your medical and financial power of attorney documents are ironclad. Get a cognitive assessment on record so no one can claim you're incapacitated. Incapacitated. The word felt absurd. If Preston's trying to gain control of your assets, the easiest path is through Trevor, especially if he can argue you're no longer capable of managing your own affairs. My stomach turned. Call Julian, Helena said. Today. Tell him I sent you. He'll want to meet in person, ask some questions. After that, he'll start digging. I stared at the card in my hand. Calvin. Helena's voice softened. I know this is hard, but you need to protect yourself. And you need to protect that farm. I nodded. I will. She walked me to the door. As I stepped into the hallway, she called after me. Calvin. I turned. Whatever's happening, she said, it's not about a chair. Don't forget that. I took the stairs back down slower this time, my mind spinning. By the time I reached my truck, I'd already pulled out my phone. 3 days later, Julian called. What he'd found would change everything. The knock at the kitchen door came at 10 sharp. I'd been up since dawn, moving through my usual routine, feeding the barn cats, checking equipment in the shed, walking the fence along the south pasture. Anything to keep my hands busy and my thoughts from spiraling. When the knock came, I was halfway through my second cup of coffee, staring at a stack of unpaid bills on the counter. I opened the door. Julian Sawyer stood on the porch with a leather messenger bag slung over one shoulder. He wore a wool coat and wire-rimmed glasses that made him look more like a professor than a private investigator. Late 50s, close-cropped gray hair, calm eyes that suggested he'd spent years listening while others talked too much. Mr. Barlow, he said, extending his hand. Julian Sawyer. Helena Crawford asked me to stop by. I shook his hand. Firm, steady. Come in, coffee? Black, he said. I poured him a cup and motioned to the kitchen table. He set his bag down, pulled out a slim folder, and opened it without wasting time. I've spent the last 3 days looking into Preston Pemberton, Julian said. And what I found isn't good. I sat across from him, Go on. He slid a printed page toward me. Iowa Insurance Division licensee search results. Preston Pemberton, Julian said. Former investment advisor. Licensed from 1995 to 2018. His license was revoked in March of that year. Revoked for what? The filing doesn't say. But licenses don't get revoked over clerical errors. It's usually fraud or mishandling client funds. He tapped the page. 2 civil lawsuits were filed around the same time. Both settled, records sealed. So we don't know what happened. Not officially. But sealed settlements usually mean someone paid to make trouble disappear. He slid another document across. A property record. Preston and his wife live in an $800,000 house. Gated community. Golf course. But he hasn't reported income since 2019. No salary. No consulting fees. Then how's he paying for it? Julian leaned back. Either he isn't or the money's off the books. My stomach tightened. He wasn't done. Another page appeared, this one with Trevor's name. Your son took out 2 business loans. $230,000 in 2019. $620,000 in 2022. Both failed. Total outstanding debt, $850,000. The number knocked the air out of me. He's been making minimum payments, Julian continued. Barely staying afloat. I thought about Trevor's house. The renovations. The new furniture. What about Natalie, I asked. Does she work? No employment records. Listed as a homemaker. So how are they living? Julian folded his hands. Trevor's salary covers maybe 60% of their expenses. The rest is coming from somewhere. My guess is Preston. The picture was forming, and I didn't like it. There's more, Julian said. His voice dropped. Someone's been asking about your farm. I stiffened. Who? I can't confirm yet. But the question started about 6 months ago. How much land you own. Whether you'd sell. How your health is. 6 months. Right when Trevor began pulling away, Julian closed the folder. I spent 25 years with the FBI and 15 doing this privately. I've seen this pattern. Someone targets a valuable asset. They work through family. They isolate the owner. They plant doubt about capacity. Then they move. You think Preston's after my farm. I think he sees opportunity. And I think Trevor's caught in the middle. I rubbed my face, fatigue settling deep. Julian pulled out one final sheet. A name and an address. Fiona Garrett, Nebraska. Widow. Lost over $3 million working with Preston 12 years ago. I haven't spoken to her yet, but I plan to. Another victim. What do I do? I asked. First, protect yourself, he said. Get a cognitive assessment. If anyone challenges your capacity, we need proof. You think they would? If desperation sets in, yes. I nodded. I'll do it. Good. Julian stood and packed his bag. I'll keep digging and contact Fiona. He handed me his card. Call if anything changes. If Trevor calls. If Preston shows up. I walked him to the door. He paused, looking over the fields. Nice land, he said. Worth fighting for. After he left, I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the papers spread across the table. Preston Pemberton. Unlicensed. Broke. Hiding something. Trevor. Drowning in debt. And me. The target. But first I had to prove I wasn't the confused old man they wanted me to be. The exam room was small and familiar, white walls, the faint smell of antiseptic, a blood pressure poster taped to the door. I'd been coming to this clinic for 20 years, ever since Dr. Bradford took over from old Doc Henley. Same vinyl chair. Same paper-covered exam table that crinkled whenever you shifted. I sat on the table, rolling up my sleeve as Dr. Amelia Bradford wrapped the cuff around my arm. Deep breath, Calvin, she said. Calm. Steady. She was in her 50s. Auburn hair streaked with gray, the kind of doctor who'd spent decades dealing with stubborn farmers who avoided clinics until something broke. The cuff tightened, then released with a soft hiss. 128/82, she said, writing it down. Right where it should be. Good to know I'm not falling apart. She smiled, Far from it. She checked my lungs clear. My heart strong, steady. Reflexes. Grip strength. A straight walk across the room. Every result the same normal. Healthy. Better than most men my age. You're in good shape, Calvin, she said. Better than a lot of 60-year-olds I see. I keep busy. She set the clipboard aside and pulled up a stool so we were eye to eye. Helena Crawford called yesterday. She said you wanted a cognitive assessment on record. I nodded. She didn't ask why. In a town this small, she didn't need to. Rumors moved faster than harvest trucks. And by now, Thanksgiving dinner at Trevor's place had become public knowledge, twisted and retold at feed stores and coffee counters. People smiled to your face, then quietly decided what kind of man you were. All right, she said. We'll do a mini mental state exam. Simple questions. Memory, attention, reasoning. Let's do it. She asked the date, the day, the location. I answered without hesitation. Wednesday, November 27th. Dr. Bradford's clinic downtown. Good. Remember 3 words, she said. Apple, table, penny. I repeated them back. She had me count backward from 100 by sevens. 72 before she stopped me. Spell world backward. DLROW. She nodded. Now a practical one. Your farm brings in $280,000 in a good year. Property taxes are $12,000. Equipment and maintenance $40,000. Seed fertilizer labor $70,000. What's your net? $158,000. And if you set aside 20%, $126,000. She smiled. Most people can't do that in their heads. Most people don't run farms. She made a final note. Do you remember the 3 words? Apple, table, penny? She leaned back. Calvin, you're sharper than most 50-year-olds. No signs of cognitive decline. None. I felt the tension drain from my shoulders. I'll have the report ready tomorrow, she said. Helena can use it if needed. But for what it's worth, you're fully capable. Thank you, Amelia. She helped me down from the table. Whatever's going on with Trevor, don't let anyone tell you you're unfit. You've got more sense than most people I know. Outside, the sun was sinking low. I sat in my truck, hands on the wheel, staring ahead, letting the quiet settle. Helena had warned me this might come to paperwork and courts, to strangers deciding what kind of man I was based on documents instead of dirt under my nails. The report would help. Helena was gathering 5 years of farm ledgers, tax returns, profit and loss statements. Together they made a solid defense against anyone claiming I couldn't manage my affairs. But defense wasn't enough. I needed to know what Preston was after. My phone buzzed. I expected Helena. Instead, Julian's name lit the screen. Need to talk. Tonight. Urgent, I called back. He answered immediately. Calvin, he said, voice tight. We need to meet. Now. What is it? Not over the phone. Can you come to the farm? I'm 20 minutes out. I'm in town. I'll be there in 30. Good, he said. Because what I found, it's not just about Preston. It's about the land beneath your feet. The line went dead. I stared at the phone. The land beneath my feet. I took one last breath, steadying myself for whatever waited ahead. I turned the key. The engine roared to life and the road home stretched. They were already waiting when I pulled into the driveway. Julian's sedan sat next to Helena's silver Buick, both parked near the porch. Through the kitchen window, I could see shadows moving inside. I'd left the door unlocked, small-town habit, and they'd let themselves in. By the time I walked through the door, they'd spread documents across the coffee table in the living room. Maps, printouts, legal files. Julian stood by the window, arms crossed, his expression grim. Helena sat on the couch, reading glasses perched on her nose, flipping through a thick binder. Calvin, Julian turned. We need to talk, now. I shrugged off my coat and tossed it over a chair. I'm listening. Helena gestured to the armchair across from her. Sit. This is going to take a minute. I sat. Julian moved to the coffee table and picked up a geological survey map, the kind with colored layers showing underground formations. He unfolded it and pointed to a section highlighted in yellow. Like your farm, he said. 380 acres. You already know that. But what you don't know is what's underneath it. I leaned forward, studying the map. The yellow section covered my entire property, south pasture, north fields, the timber along the creek. Every inch of it. This is the Bakken Shale Formation, Julian continued. It runs through parts of North Dakota, Montana, and here northwest Iowa. It's one of the richest oil and natural gas deposits in the country. I stared at him. Oil on my land. Not just oil. Mineral rights. He pulled out another document, a geological report stamped with a company logo I didn't recognize. This survey was commissioned 3 months ago by a geologist named Dr. Brian Lockwood. And guess who hired him? Preston. Bingo! Julian tapped the report. Lockwood's findings estimate the mineral rights beneath your property are worth between $45 and $60 million. The number hung in the air like a thunderclap. I couldn't breathe. 45 to 60 million! My voice came out hoarse. Helena looked up from her binder. Calvin, do you own the mineral rights to your land? I tried to think. My grandfather bought this farm in 1952. He owned it outright. My father inherited it. Then me. So, yes. I think so. Good. Helena made a note. That means if someone wanted to extract oil or gas, they'd need your permission, or they'd need to control you. Julian pulled out another page. Apex Energy Corporation. They're a mid-sized oil and gas company based in Oklahoma. Over the last 3 months, they've been in talks with Preston Pemberton. 4 meetings, all documented. What kind of talks? Lease negotiations. Apex wants to lease the mineral rights to your land. Their offer, $8 to $10 million upfront, plus 15 to 18% royalties on everything they extract. I did the math in my head. Even on the low end, that was generational wealth. Money that could secure Miles's future. Trevor's future. Hell, the future of every Barlow for the next 100 years. But there's a problem, Julian said. Preston doesn't own your land. You do. So he can't make the deal. Unless he controls me, I finished. Exactly. Helena flipped open her binder and pulled out a legal document. This is a petition for conservatorship. If someone can prove you're incapacitated mentally or physically, they can ask the court to appoint a conservator to manage your affairs. And if Trevor's named conservator, he'd have the legal authority to lease those mineral rights. And Preston controls Trevor. Precisely. Julian set down the report and looked at me. Calvin Preston Pemberton is broke. Worse than broke. He filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy 8 months ago. He owes $8.2 million to creditors, and his house is about to be foreclosed on. He's desperate, and desperate men do dangerous things. I thought about Thanksgiving, the empty chair, Trevor's trembling hands, the way Preston had smiled when I walked away. This was never about family. It was never about respect. It was about $60 million. There's more, Julian said quietly. He pulled out a thin file and slid it across the table. Her name is Fiona Garrett. 12 years ago, she inherited $3.2 million from her late husband. Preston was her investment advisor. He convinced her to invest it all in a development project farmland just like yours. 6 months later, the company dissolved. The money vanished. She sued but couldn't prove fraud. Preston walked away clean. And now he's doing it again. Same playbook, different target. Julian's jaw tightened. Preston finds vulnerable people, widows, elderly clients, family members. He gains their trust. And then he takes everything. Helena closed her binder and looked at me. Calvin, if Trevor gets conservatorship, Preston gets access to those mineral rights. He'll lease them to Apex, take the upfront payment, and disappear before anyone realizes what happened. Trevor will be left holding the bag, and you'll lose everything. I sat back trying to process it all. Trevor didn't know. He couldn't. My son wasn't a criminal. He wasn't a fraud. He was a good man who'd gotten in over his head, who'd trusted the wrong person, and Preston had used that trust like a weapon. What do I do? I asked. Helena leaned forward. First, we protect the mineral rights. I'll file a declaration with the county recorder's office making it clear you have no intention of selling or leasing. That'll create a paper trail. Gentle, Julian added. We need to tell Trevor. He deserves to know what's happening, what Preston's really after. I thought about my son, the way he'd looked at me that night, the pain in his eyes. He won't believe me, I said. Preston's got him convinced I'm losing my mind. So then we show him the evidence, Helena said. The geological survey, the bankruptcy filing, Fiona Garrett's case, we lay it all out, and we hope he's smart enough to see the truth. Julian pulled out his phone and checked the screen. There's a diner about 30 miles from here. Neutral ground. Quiet. I can have everything ready by Saturday night. Saturday. 2 days away. I nodded slowly. All right, I'll call him. Helena stood gathering her documents. Calvin, this won't be easy. Trevor's been under Preston's influence for a long time. He might not want to hear it. I know. Julian handed me a USB drive. Everything's on here. Geological Survey bankruptcy records, Apex correspondence, Fiona's case. If Trevor asks for proof, you'll have it. I took the drive and slipped it into my pocket. After they left, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the maps spread across the coffee table. $45 to $60 million. Buried under soil my great-grandfather had broken with a plow. Hidden beneath fields I'd walked 1,000 times. Preston had known. For months he'd known. And he'd been circling, waiting for the right moment to strike. But he'd made one mistake. He'd underestimated me. I pulled out my phone and stared at Trevor's name in my contacts. The hardest conversation of my life was 2 days away. The diner sat 30 miles outside of town, tucked between a grain elevator and a shuttered gas station on Highway 20. The kind of place truckers stopped for coffee at 3 in the morning, where the pie was decent and nobody asked questions. I'd gotten there early, claimed a booth in the back corner, and ordered coffee I didn't drink. Through the window, I watched headlights sweep across the gravel parking lot. Trevor's SUV pulled in just after 8. He sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, hands on the wheel, staring at the diner's neon sign. Finally, he climbed out and walked toward the door. He looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes. Unshaven. His jacket hung loose like he'd lost weight. When he stepped inside, he scanned the room until he found me, then made his way to the booth without a word. He slid into the seat across from me. Dad. Trevor. The waitress appeared with a pot of coffee. Trevor nodded, and she filled his cup before disappearing back behind the counter. We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the fluorescent lights filling the space between us. Thanks for coming, I said. Trevor wrapped his hands around the cup. You said it was important. It is. He looked up, and for the first time in 3 years, I saw my son. Not the man who'd pushed me away at Thanksgiving. Not the stranger who'd been pulling back for months. Just Trevor. Exhausted, scared, lost. Are you happy, son? I asked. He blinked, caught off guard. What? I'm not here to fight. I'm not here to guilt you. I just want to know, are you happy? Trevor's jaw tightened. He looked down at his coffee, his fingers trembling slightly around the cup. No, he said quietly. I'm not. I nodded. Tell me what's going on. It came out slowly at first, then all at once. The debt, $850,000 from 2 business ventures that had collapsed. The constant pressure from Natalie to keep up appearances, to live in the right neighborhood, to drive the right car. Preston stepping in, offering advice, offering money, offering a way out. He said you were struggling. Trevor said, his voice cracking. That the farm was failing, that you were getting confused, forgetting things. He said I needed to step in before you lost everything, and you believed him. Trevor looked up, his eyes red. He's my father-in-law. Why wouldn't I? I reached into the messenger bag I'd brought and pulled out the USB drive. I slid it across the table along with a manila folder. Because he's lying to you, I said, and I can prove it. Trevor stared at the folder but didn't open it. Inside that folder, I continued, you'll find Preston's bankruptcy filing. Chapter 11. He owes $8.2 million. His house is about to be foreclosed. He's broke, Trevor. Worse than broke. Trevor opened the folder with shaking hands. His eyes scanned the first page, a legal document stamped with a court seal. His face went pale. This can't be right. It's right. I pulled out another document. This is a geological survey of my farm. Did you know there's oil under my land mineral rights worth $45 to $60 million? Trevor's head snapped up. What? Apex Energy wants to lease it. $8 to $10 million upfront plus royalties. Preston's been negotiating with them for months. 4 meetings. All documented. I slid the Apex correspondence across the table. But he can't lease those rights, I said, because I own them. Unless someone takes control of my farm. Someone like you. Trevor stared at the papers, his breathing shallow. There's more. I pulled out a thin file. Fiona Garrett. 12 years ago, Preston was her investment advisor. She inherited $3.2 million. He convinced her to invest it all. 6 months later, it was gone. She sued him but couldn't prove fraud. He walked away clean. Dad, I didn't. I know you didn't. I leaned forward. Preston's been planning this for months. He found you when you were vulnerable. He offered help. He made himself indispensable. And then he started isolating you from me. Trevor's hands were shaking. He said you were losing your mind. I pulled out the final document, Dr. Bradford's medical report. Shakti, this is from 3 days ago. Full cognitive assessment. Blood pressure reflexes, memory tests, problem solving. Dr. Bradford says I'm sharper than most 50-year-olds she sees. Trevor read the report, his face crumbling. And these, I said, pulling out 5 years of farm ledgers, are the books. $250,000 to $280,000 in profit every year. The farm isn't failing. It's thriving. Trevor set down the papers and covered his face with his hands. He lied to me, he whispered. He's been lying the whole time. Yes, and I believed him. Trevor looked up, the tears streaming down his